So, if more applications of AI were as boring and mundane and in the background as spell check, we'd be a lot more focused on what we're trying to accomplish with it and not necessarily how it works or treating it like a curiosity and then putting it back on the shelf.
Welcome to Workmorphis Wired, where we dive deep into the future of work and explore the transformative impact of AI and other emerging tech through conversations with thought leaders, policy experts, and industry innovators. Our guest today is Cal Al-Dubaib, who is a data scientist, entrepreneur, and AI and machine learning strategist. Cal is passionate about making AI boring and safe, as he says, and he has built multiple businesses dedicated to helping leaders in heavily regulated industries bridge the gap between AI innovation and ethical responsibility. Cal is the founder and CEO of Pandata, an award winning firm that helps organizations design and develop AI solutions in high risk settings such as healthcare, life sciences, energy, financial services, and defense. Earlier this year, Pandata was acquired by Further, which is a privacy first AI data and analytics company. Today, Cal serves as Further's head of AI and data science. We couldn't be more excited to have Cal on the podcast to learn about how he thinks about trust, humans and AI, and future workforce opportunities. Welcome, Cal.
Hi, Emily. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm excited to join you today.
We've been excited to have you as a guest on the podcast for a couple of months now, so glad to be together. And before we jump into a deep dive on AI, wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive on your journey. It's been a busy past couple of months for you, a lot to celebrate. And so if you don't mind, would love to ask you when you first became interested in AI and data science, and what about those subjects actually drew you in?
So, when I was an undergrad, I joked that I had a major for every year I was an undergrad. And so, of course, I had to change my major 7 times. But the biggest focus of my education was in the field of neuroscience. And I loved learning about how the brain worked and how humans think. And an area that particularly fascinated me is the fact that humans can be silly and the way we make decisions isn't always necessarily data driven. And yet, our evolution and the way in which we think is remarkably helpful for functioning and helps us do the things that we do. And so, when I started to find myself in the world of data and analytics, and that we could start to uncover patterns that influence how people behave, I immediately fell in love with the world of data science. And that slowly got me into machine learning, which is the process of teaching machines to do some of these human like pattern recognition tasks. And then the rest was history. I fell in love with the space and actually started Pandata while I was wrapping up my undergraduate degree. I got to be the first data science graduate out of Case Western Reserve University. And it was at a time when people were saying, we have data, we don't know what to do with it. Back in 2016, the field was still relatively niche. And I started to notice, and many others in the field did as well, that along with our newfound powers to teach machines to do things, there's a lot of these unintended consequences. And so that became my personal mission statement of how do we build machine learning and AI solutions responsibly? How do we do it in a way in industries where it's needed the most, but with the right guardrails? And as the tech has evolved from where it was 10 years ago to where it is today, where we've got large language models, that focus has always been my North Star.
Wow. And as the first data science graduate at Case Western, I mean, you were really ahead of the curve. How did you go from neuroscience to learning about data science when it was a relatively new or niche area?
So it's funny because the major changes were a function of me saying, I'm not sure I'm getting what I need. Maybe this is what my career will line up to. And so by the time I was in my final years of undergrad, I had accumulated courses in advanced statistics, applied mathematics, specifically in biology. I had a little of a pivot into economics and business systems. And so these were kind of the building blocks of data science. A little bit of human behavior, a little bit of business understanding, and then combine that with being able to compute, develop programs, and analyze data at scale. And when they had announced, the university, that they were going to open a data science major, I got so excited. And so here I am on major number 6, and I call my dad and I say, Dad, I'm going to change my major one more time. And he thought I had about lost it. And I said, no, 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 this makes sense. I'm just going to take all the courses that I've done and we're going to package it into this data science major. So I was very fortunate. I worked with some tremendous advisors, and we worked with the Office of Undergraduate Studies and the Dean of Undergraduate Studies to map out all of my coursework into that major. And so that's how that happened.
That's incredible that you were able to pave the way and that you really did go through 7 majors. But as somebody with such diverse interests, it sounds like you found the right field. That's awesome. You talked a little bit about how you started Pandata while you were at Case, and I'd love to go a little bit deeper into your entrepreneurial journey because I know Pandata wasn't even the first company you started, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about your entrepreneurship journey?
Yeah, so I started off on a corporate scholarship. I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia, and I was fortunate enough to achieve the right standardized scores that qualified me to apply for this opportunity. And Saudi Aramco paid for me to come to school in the US to line up with a future career opportunity with them. And so I was very focused on engineering. My dad's an engineer. My mom had worked in corporate HR. I didn't even know entrepreneurship was a career path. And I was getting involved in undergraduate research at the time. And there was this one semester, and I still have this picture of it with my mop of a hair, which was really trending back in 2010. Let's not talk about those life choices, with 3 different research posters. And Bob Sobko, who headed up the Student Entrepreneurship Center at Case, stops by. He says, have you considered commercializing this stuff? He saw that energy, that entrepreneurial energy there. And I didn't even know starting a company was an option. And I took a plunge and I built Triple Analytics based off of that research, which was focused on using machine learning to identify patterns that could influence personalized medicine pathways. And this required working with electronic medical records, with tech that was still emerging, and it was a poor product market fit, poor timing, also a very inexperienced entrepreneur, but I learned so much. I was able to raise about $250,000 between some incubators and angel money, built some great relationships with hospitals right here in our backyard in Cleveland, Ohio. And when that startup started to fail, there were a lot of difficult conversations. And one of those difficult conversations was actually with the clients that we were serving. We had these pilots, but there was no intent to pay for this software. But I found that we were providing free research service. And we were trying to find ways to be sticky and get the client engaged. And it turned out all along that the stuff they would have paid for is the services. They wanted help understanding their clinical data. They wanted help being able to analyze it. And so that was the end of Triple Analytics and the birth of Pandata. And just to give you a sense of the problem and workforce take on this, in 2016, there were fewer than 150 data scientists in all of Northeast Ohio, and about a third of them worked for one of 3 companies: Progressive, Cleveland Clinic, or what was known at that time as Exploris, and then became a part of IBM Watson. And every other major corporation had maybe 1 or 2. And that was the birth of Pandata. It was such an incredible opportunity to say, hey, we're going to find a way to solve for this talent pipeline, get a critical mass of data scientists together who could design and build these types of solutions for different organizations. And we continued to evolve as the skill set became more commoditized. We now have close to 1,000 in Northeast Ohio. Not a lot, but much better than that picture, with much more diversity across companies. We started to double down on this area of high risk, right? Where there's you're either using these solutions on sensitive data sets or in situations where the cost of making a mistake is high. And that became an area that was unique, specialized, differentiated. Not a lot of groups were going after it. And that's what ultimately that lens and that focus led to our acquisition by Further.
So inspiring to hear how you took the experience of founding Triple Analytics and really took the lessons learned and the market research that you got along the way as an opportunity to start Pandata. And perfect segue into the acquisition. So, can you explain a little bit more about your decision to pursue the further acquisition and what about them was so attractive to you?
As cheesy as it sounds, culture was the cornerstone of the deal. And I remember meeting Mike Gustafson, the CEO of Further, around October last year. So this wasn't that long ago. And he'd reached out and said, "Hey, we want to talk about some opportunities." And within 5 minutes of walking into his office, he says, "So we're thinking of buying you guys." And I go, "Oh." And I was really nervous. I had this big vision for where I was going with Pandata, but I also knew there were some challenges with scaling. We were still at the point where the tech was evolving so fast. As the founder CEO, I was wearing so many different hats, and because I had bootstrapped Pandata, it really was client and revenue driven. And that kind of changes your decision making on things that you'd rather do for long term versus focusing on cash flow. And before I entertained this idea any further, no pun intended, I asked Mike about the culture, and I really wanted to understand, like, how do they deal with things like failure? How do they support their team members? There were a couple cornerstones of Pandata that were so important to me. One was the core values and how we tied that to hiring, evaluating, and revenue generating activities, and then how we made space to focus on learning. Like, we kept a very low or relatively low utilization rate because we're in this field that's evolving so quickly. And I wanted to see, like, do all of these core beliefs match up? And once we got through that, and I realized, hey, there's a lot of alignment here. And I got to meet other people on the further leadership team, and I got to see the same sorts of beliefs and attitudes. I started to get really excited about what this would look like. And that's when we started to talk numbers, financials, size, and things lined up from there. But the whole diligence process was completed between December and early March this year. And man, I was busy and I could not tell people why I was busy.
You mentioned it sounds cheesy. I don't think it sounds cheesy at all that you were focused on culture. And it's not surprising because one of the things that I've admired most about your journey and following your journey as you've grown Pandata is your transparency and authenticity and that of your team. And just the fact that you are very open about what Pandata is working on and what it's like to be inside of Pandata. And I think really getting an inside view into the culture at a company is what can allow people to be passionate beyond the day-to-day work. So, quickly on that note, how is your work going to change in this new role, going from founder and CEO of Pandata for 8 years to your new position?
It's funny that you bring that up. And I had been so focused on getting this deal to the finish line and then starting up this new role. And over the past 6 weeks, I've been dealing with this who am I question. Because for 10 years between Triple Analytics and Pandata, I was founder, CEO, I had founder energy, technically still have founder energy. And I had some good friends counsel me on this and say, that part doesn't go away. Once you have your founder card, you get to keep it. But in my new role, I get to take away some of the hats that were maybe distracting. My marching orders are three things: community and client engagement, right? So go out there, educate, uplift, help inform, create a movement around boring, responsible AI, talent attraction. So finding great folks who have the same beliefs, who want to come in and do this kind of work. And then the third thing is be in the trenches with our client executives and spend the time leading AI strategy and training others to lead AI strategy. And I get really excited when I think of that's what should be on my plate. And sadly, up until this point, there was a good chunk of my time that went into chasing things like invoices and insurance and running billable hours and all of the standard stuff that goes into making a business profitable and functional. So I'm excited actually about this narrow scope, bigger platform of clients, more variety, and being able to do more of the stuff I love.
That's amazing. Just the idea of being able to focus on the part of the work that you love most and not having to chase the invoices. I definitely know that and share your passion and the founder energy, but it goes in a lot of different directions. So, this focus sounds like it's going to be really impactful for you and the further team and your team.
Well, and to bring this full circle, I mean, for me and why culture was so important here is I always saw culture as a business decision. Right? You talked a little bit about the openness that we maintained as a culture at Pandata. The same is true with Further. And I find that you need to set that norm internally and attract the people that operate that way. Because when we talk about AI, the reason why this tech so often fails is because we're blindsided by an unintended consequence. It's not that people are trying to create malicious, bad uses of AI, although there are bad actors out there. Most people, most of the things that we hear about in the news are the result of a system breaking in a way we didn't expect it to break because patterns didn't match the reality, or there was some unintentional negative bias that was reflected in the data set. And so having individuals that feel comfortable voicing those types of concerns, walking clients through difficult conversations, that's the secret sauce behind building robust, safe, responsible AI.
Yes, culture is so essential when it comes to building trust. And would love to talk a little bit more about that, your perspective on trust. We know this is a constant concern for leaders, for workers, for really everyone. And you've mentioned your passion for making AI boring. So, can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Absolutely. So whenever we talk about AI in the, I don't know, popular culture, we think Terminator, we think fancy flying cars, or a super intelligent version of Siri that can like book your entire next trip for you. And it's a novelty. It's something that has a mystique, and there's this connotation of it's got intelligence and it understands things in ways that we don't quite comprehend. And so that kind of gets in the way of using it productively. And so when I say boring AI, I mean spell check, for example. Sometimes it gets it wrong, but it all kind of works in the background. You start writing your messages, and then it starts cleaning things up. And 90% of the time, it's right and it's useful. And it just works. And we don't put a lot of thought into how is spell check doing what it's doing. So, if more applications of AI were as boring and mundane and in the background as spell check, we'd be a lot more focused on what we're trying to accomplish with it and not necessarily how it works or treating it like a curiosity and then putting it back on the shelf.
Love that. And it sounds like really demystifying and creating those boring AI applications can lead to greater trust. What role does human oversight play in the trust building process?
So, let's talk about ROI for a moment. One of the biggest misses in my mind, especially because we talk about the role of AI and automating away tasks, and how that affects certain jobs. And it actually peeves me a lot when we measure the efficacy of an AI solution with how much time it's saving, because we now immediately connect time saved to, oh, it can take us less effort to do the thing. And so the naive ROI calculation is how much did it take to build the AI thing? How much is it going to take us to run it on an ongoing basis versus the time saved? And that's our ROI. Reality is, especially in situations where you're using generative models that have direct customer facing consequences, there's a lot more cost that goes into maintaining those systems than just serving up the models. Depending on the level of risk, there's a whole host of activities that have to happen pre and post going live. And we call these guardrails. Before a model goes live, there's an activity called red teaming that's essential. And what red teaming is coming up with a whole bunch of different ways in which you want to try to fool these models to come up with negative things or produce toxic content or reveal potential information. And you want to do that internally first to avoid embarrassment later if somebody tries to hack your model. So red teaming is the process where you say, all right, we're going to get silly with these models and really push their limits and see where they break. And then you have, okay, we've gone live. Somebody has to be watching these chatbots on an ongoing basis, or these solutions. And sometimes it's, hey, we're going to take a random sample every 30 days. Sometimes it's as they're coming. And it really takes human eyeballs to catch something and say, whoa, that's weird. Or, whoa, we're getting a lot of inputs that are prompts that just seem bizarre or repeated from the same individual. Let's investigate that. And so going back to ROI, there's all this human effort that most people are not trained for, that's now necessary and a critical part of that ROI equation. So it's two problems in one. I think we're naively looking at ROI, and two, we're not quite yet, or only few organizations are really getting to the other side of what do we do with that time we've now saved.
Right. I love that. And so if ROI isn't simply an equation of time savings versus investment, what are some of the other more impactful ways that you're seeing organizations maximize ROI?
So it can be volume, it can be quality. There's something to be said. There's some tasks that I do today that take me about the same amount of time with Gen AI, except I'm able to deliver better results. One of my favorite things is building in graphics that help story tell the articles that I write about. And that was an activity I never used to do. And now I have so much fun doing it. And it helps really connect the narrative to a visual anchor. So, quality, volume, time to executing on a task, and dare I add into the mix, work life balance. I've done some form of this poll in front of many, many different audiences over the past 2 years. And I'll ask the question, raise your hand if you are overwhelmed in your current role. And almost every hand in the room goes up. We're trying to squeeze more and more out of fewer people. And I think it's a very exciting proposition that we can say, well, what if we could work 20% less and still do the same? Like, that's a valuable KPI too.
Absolutely. And one that's so valuable for satisfaction and culture and so many of the other, sometimes less tangible things that matter, sometimes even more to the success of an organization. That's wonderful to hear. And I'd like to go a little bit deeper on humans and AI and what that equation can look like. We've learned from a lot of guests on this podcast that the real power of AI comes when it is applied as a tool to augment human activity and human creativity. And in this way, the human plus AI equation can be seen as synergistic, in which the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Why do you think AI should be seen as a tool to uplift humans instead of one capable of replacing them?
We're not so good at describing how effectively Gen AI models can reason. In fact, the whole term AI is problematic. We don't know what intelligence is. I just wrote an article about this recently, and when we think about intelligence, right? What is it? Is it when I look at an article and I can summarize it into 3 paragraphs? Is it intelligent when my cat gets up on its 2 hind legs and begs for treats? Is it intelligent when a monkey does a science experiment where they trade grapes for something else? And is it intelligent that, like, when our hand is on a hot burner, we immediately move it away as a self defense mechanism? And so all of these things are intelligence. But what we're really worried about when it comes to AI is, what are the tasks that machines excel at, and to what extent, and what are the tasks that human excel at? And when we see an AI solution summarize one document, it's easy to believe that we can now ask it a sophisticated question about 10 different documents. And that's not quite how it works. And so when I think about getting the most out of human plus AI, it requires a foundation in 3 things: AI safety, AI literacy, and then AI readiness. Safety is, how do I keep myself safe from AI generated scams? How do I think about confidential and sensitive information and the use of these tools, basic safety. AI literacy is getting a step deeper and saying, where do models excel? Where do they break? How do they break? What's reasonable expectation? Understanding how biases occur and costs of errors, and then when to ask for help. And then the last thing, AI readiness, is really for a specific tool, whether it's data analysis or writing articles or writing code with a copilot. You're really diving deep into how do I use this tool for this task. And those are the three necessary ingredients to get the most out of AI. And there's this great article I read on HBR that goes into the use of AI for brainstorming. And the title is so catchy. It's fun. It says, don't let AI get in the way of creativity. And they actually benchmarked when groups jumped straight to using Gen AI first. The quality of the worst performing groups got a little bit better, but the quality of the top performing groups got a little bit worse. And they found that like a simple best practice, like human first for the first 15 minutes, then invite Gen AI to the table to expand your ideas, resulted in higher quality work. So we haven't yet defined what these best practices look like exhaustively, but that's a flavor of the stuff that we're starting to figure out this year and over the short to mid-term that'll be essential to getting the most out of AI.
There's also been a lot of evidence that I've been reading lately about how the trust and comfort level with AI increases as people have more exposure. And to your point about safety, literacy, and readiness, that seems to be a theme across all of the guests that we've had on this podcast about the need for greater literacy, for more exposure, experimentation, because that only drives trust. From your experience, at what stage is it best to bring in the people who are going to be working alongside a new technology like this?
We start all of our projects with a phase that we call discovery and design. And especially when it comes to machine learning and AI projects, there are so many unknown unknowns at the start that you want to very quickly fail fast at. And that's why we do this. We're trying to understand what problem are we trying to solve and how are decisions made today. One of the most dangerous things that I see is when a group is so excited to use AI to do something that humans aren't already doing. Like, okay, we're going to use AI to qualify these patients for this program. And if they didn't already have a human process in place, it's like, well, why are we rushing to use AI for that? And in some cases, justified, right? The volume is too big, it's too complex of a problem, we couldn't do it without AI. And even then, you want to take a step back and say, okay, if a human were to do this, how would you manage them? What would good look like? What does solving the problem look like? And so you get all these basic benchmarks in place. And what we're really trying to do with discovery and design is do a deep dive into decision making. Once we know how decisions would be made or evaluated or influenced, we can do a pretty good job from there as data scientists understanding what types of models are possible, what are some of the limitations, how right or correct we might be, and then we can tie that back to decision making. Right? Is this something where you can't afford any failure? Is this something where you need to provide all the right information for a human to make a better decision? But when you do a deep dive into those decision processes, it makes it so much easier when you're building the system to identify those objection points early and often and go back to the stakeholders throughout.
That's fantastic advice and really great insights for decision makers who are listening, because there are so many questions, not a lot of concrete insights or advice out there about how to go about implementing AI and which problems to focus on solving. So, very insightful. Thank you. I'd like to spend a little more time talking about future workforce opportunities. I know this is something that really crosses both of our areas of passion. It's becoming increasingly clear that AI plays a major role in workforce transformation, both by affecting the way people work and by influencing workforce processes. So, how do you see AI affecting the workforce of the future broadly?
The most obvious thing is recognizing that a lot of knowledge work consists of tasks that are exposed to Gen AI. Step one is really creating a baseline understanding of AI literacy. I like to think of the digital transformations of the last 2, 3 decades of happening in 3 phases. And these phases correspond to when a critical mass of the workforce was expected to have a strong grasp on a set of skills. So the 2000s was digital literacy, and by the end of that decade, you needed to have a strong grasp of word processing, spreadsheet editing, and being able to use digital tools to perform knowledge work. The 2010s was the data literacy wave, and we're still at the final innings of that. But to put it in context, tools like Tableau and Power BI didn't even exist or weren't widely used at the start of the decade. And now you can't get an analyst job without knowing how to build reports and dashboards and drill downs. And we've gone through these types of transformations before. And so we're entering what I call the very early phases of AI literacy as a part of the workforce. And that means knowing when to trust AI, when to be skeptical, knowing what types of tasks it's useful for. So when we think about workforce disruption, the very users that are going to be, or the very individuals that are going to be overseeing these systems are already within these organizations. And organizations getting ahead of this are investing today in AI literacy training and getting their workforce up to speed. Then there's this whole new class of new jobs to be done. And whether that's as mundane as data labeling, or oversight of models, or auditing of models, or conducting red teaming, there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that front. And the dirty secret behind a lot of these big AI model providers is that there is a lot of time and effort that goes into giving human led feedback to these models to be able to teach them how to do certain things. And that's not going to slow down anytime soon. In fact, when we think about the application of, let's say, AI to clinical applications, and we start getting into things that require specialized knowledge on cardiology or eye care or insert whatever, you or I are certainly not going to be the people they hire to evaluate those data sets and say good, not good. You really have to have a highly skilled, well compensated individual involved in that oversight. So I think organizations need to start thinking about who's involved in that process, who's involved in oversight, what sort of experts that now have time reduced from their workload are able to do more things, or better yet, reimagining a process that leads to higher quality, because now we take the best of AI and the best of human combined. And we're still kind of lost in this phase one of automation mindset.
That is such a great way of describing the different waves in each decade of literacy that are required. And, the unfortunate reality is that we still are not perfect when it comes to literacy. I mean, digital literacy is still a challenge that we're thinking about every day when it comes to workforce development. And so, when we talk about AI literacy, and this is something that's come up with a lot of our podcast guests before, I personally believe it's one of the biggest policy imperatives facing our time and our generation. And also something that, like you said, smart business leaders are getting ahead of. So, for a business leader and then for a policy leader, what would be step one to implementing AI literacy within their organization or community?
So, to a policy leader, we just got to acknowledge the reality that we can't expect educators to have the right education by default to equip the next generation. We're talking about emerging tech that we're all learning today. Frankly, no one's an expert on this because we've all had about the same length of tenure learning to grapple with this. And some of us might have more intuition because maybe we've spent 10 more years working with the weirdness of data and machine learning. But this Gen AI revolution and AI literacy in context of Gen AI is something relatively new. And so we need to take a look at, like, what are the standards for teaching this skill? What do we want to define as this skill? And how do we qualify individuals to then educate others? From the business leader perspective, safe to fail pilot programs are essential. I've been excited about some of the upcoming regulation in the world of AI and data privacy. And so the EU AI Act, for example, has certain requirements for high risk systems, including things like conformity assessments. And so that has a checklist of this is how you vet an AI system, and these are the individuals and roles involved. And so I think getting ahead of all of that and applying that mindset to how you pilot AI tools and having that same checklist and identifying the roles that need to be involved and running a pilot on a small focus group. So let's say you're using ChatGPT Enterprise or Microsoft Copilot 365. We're going to run this with the tech support team for the next 3 months. We're going to keep a running log of any time something weird happened, the types of tasks it added the most value to, how we quantify that value, etc. And then after 90 days, you do a retrospective and you try to surface what were some common points of frustration, what were some areas of success, and you translate that into, all right, here are the things that we need to learn, or multiple people encountered the same roadblock, or actually we found that these 5 super users did these 10 things that we want to teach everyone else how to do to get the most out of the tool. But you've got to run those pilots today to build the muscle to be ready for it in a year, 2, 3 years from now. But don't listen to any of the folks saying that you are missing the bandwagon, because we're still in the early innings.
That's great to hear. And when you say safe to fail, I mean, it really sounds like an environment where people can experiment without big consequences and learn. Is that what it's all about?
I mean, I'll give you a great example. We were working with a client recently on coming up with a really cool use case. I can't give all the details away yet, but it's a cool use case that would help their customers with a complex product selection process. And it just checked all the boxes. Like, it made sense. The purchasing journey is long, it's difficult, it's intimidating, and most consumers wouldn't have the skill set. And like, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if? Well, the very first version of that could be a tool that equips a customer service representative to guide a customer through all of the same, where we're surfacing recommendations and insights, and a customer service agent can say, great, not great, respond, provide more prompts, have it plugged directly into a transcript that's listening to that whole conversation. And so if the model fails in a weird way, you've got this barrier of the human operator to the consumer on the other side of it. And we have opportunities to capture that. And ideally, even in that process, we're delivering value because you're creating more consistency, you're surfacing more insights that might be relevant. So that's an example of what that looks like. Safe to fail internally, learn, build a better, more robust system, and then gradually roll out features or capabilities that we deem safe and effective.
Wow. Love it. And this has been such an incredible conversation. I've learned so much. You have such a talent for really taking otherwise complex concepts and making them really approachable, which is part of what I think makes you so successful in all of the conversations that you have about this. I really appreciate you spending the time with me today and all the insights for listeners. I think there's a lot of good information here that people can act upon immediately. So we'll go ahead and link to any resources that you've posted recently. But before we wrap up, Cal, are there any upcoming announcements or last words that you want to share with our listeners?
Well, I'm super stoked as board member on the awesome Women in Analytics community that we've got our upcoming conference this July 11th and 12th. The 11th is my birthday, and I would love for folks to come join us in Columbus and hang out and nerd out about data and AI and responsible AI. But aside from that, Emily, I had so much fun in this conversation. Thank you for creating the space to talk about AI meets human meets workforce. I had a blast here.
Ah, me too. We will definitely link to the Women in Analytics event, one of the best in Columbus and in the US. It's been amazing to watch that organization grow and fun to know that you're such a big part of it. And we'll be celebrating on your birthday. So, thank you so much for your time today, Cal. Really glad to have you on. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Workmorphis Wired. If you enjoyed the conversation, please let us know by leaving a rating and review. To make sure you don't miss any future episodes, be sure to subscribe. Finally, if you found value in today's discussion, we hope you'll pass the podcast along to a friend or colleague. As always, thanks for tuning out the noise and tuning in to Workmorphis Wired.